In this video, we're going to be discussing replication failover. In the Veeam interface, it's very easy to perform a replication failover because the steps are simply laid out and easy to follow. But the logic behind those steps can sometimes be challenging for people to understand. We're going to use a light board and do a demonstration that's more like a flow chart to help you better understand how this process works and really better understand what can happen when you select a certain process. Let's take a look at the demonstration.
Today we're going to look at replication failover as it pertains to Veeam. Now what we're going to do is really cover the logical of this instead of getting into a lot of the details of, say, the Delta files or snapshots, because knowing the logic is really going to help you build a strong foundation to be able to answer a lot of other questions. So over here we're going to talk about prod, which is the original location. That's where the original virtual machine resides. DR is where the replica is going to reside, or where we replicated a copy of that virtual machine. Now for this discussion, this replica is going to be off-site. Okay, so a true DR, not something that could be on-prem. And that'll make sense in a moment as we go through our examples. So let's start here by identifying prod. Now from here, we've had an event where we have realized that we need to fail over to our DR site. Okay, there's going to be different ideas that we can use, but for the first example, let's just cover generally failover. So at this point, what we have done is we have failed over to the DR site. Now, with this failover process, we are now running over on this DR site, and the original has been shut down. The next option that we have, which is very important to understand and think about, is if prod in most cases is no longer available, it is not an option anymore. Okay, it's down, the network is down, the entire site's down, whatever it is, that's where we would make this first possible decision. And that first decision would be a permanent failover. Now, the reason why it's so important to define this is because once you do a permanent failover, you have broken the replication for that job, for that virtual machine. Because again, in the name it says permanent. We want it to stay over here at the DR site. Once that is discussed, some people might look at this and say, well, wait a minute, what if I want to fail back to production? Well, the second decision is if you still had prod as an option, we do have the possibility of what's called failback. Now, what this does is allows us to fail back here into production. So that's why I'm running the arrow up this way to show you we're going back toward production. Once we fail back, now we're starting to bring some of the data that was collected while we were at the DR site and start bringing it back into the production level. If we're happy and we want to stay at production and have that content that was collected at the DR level come with us, then we can do something called commit failback. And what that does is now says we are now running on production, replication is still there, and we continue on, and this now will become the last known good, and we're back to production, but with any changes that happened during that failover period. Now, to better clarify this, let's create a situation. So at 12 a.m., we did, let's say, our replica, okay? So we synchronized at 12 a.m. a replica down to the DR site. Now, listen carefully. In this example, we're only doing an example of every 24 hours we're doing a replica. Some people might do them every hour. So for this example, I'm trying to make sure that we're very clear that these are 24-hour replica jobs, okay? So while this is in this state, after the replica, that original machine is still creating data. Now let's say we look over and at 6 a.m. we see that there is a failure, okay? Well, if there is a failure, that doesn't mean that at exactly 6 a.m. it failed. It could have been at 5 or 4, but there was still content being written up to this point. But this content was not copied down to the replica. That's a very important thing to consider. So at this point, we have a meeting and decide at 7 a.m. that we are going to fail over. And from this point forward, we are writing data down here to the replica. Okay? Now, this concept is really important because there are going to be two situations where in almost every case you're going to lose data, but you chose to lose that data. So the first one is if I say that I just want to do a permanent failover. Well, remember, when I failed over, I launched that replica from this point, and I did it at 7 a.m. And if I say I want to permanently fail over, this information is not included. Now, that could be because I had malware. That's what caused the failure. I could have corruption. That's what caused that failure. And I don't want that information down here. So when I permanently failed over, I left that bad data behind that was written after 12 a.m. Okay? So that's a reason why that permanent failover, it's not bad to have data lost because the data you lost was maybe data you didn't want. Okay? Now, with all of this in place, there are two more features that we have to discuss, but they can create a bit of confusion, and I want to make sure that we truly understand as we go back to these processes, all right? But the next one is Failback. Now, this is where we have a little bit of a difference. So when we say Failback, now we do that, let's say at 10 a.m. When we say Failback, we're taking this data and bringing it back up here and trying to do our best to combine those two into the most current data that we can have. The only loss would probably be between when this failure happened and when you started the failover. So once again, a failback and commit failback will include this and this data to create the most current and most complete compiling of information between those two time frames. Now, there is another feature, or two features I should say, that are undo features. And this is why I wait to the end to discuss this, because if you bring these in too early, it can create confusion. Undo failovers, to me, they have their purpose, but I've always looked at them as safety nets. So the first one that we're looking at is undo failover. Okay? Now, when we talk about undo failover, what we're saying is, I don't want to fail over anymore, okay? So I failed over, but I want to go back to prod. And what undo failover really says is I want to use this data, and I don't care about this data. So an undo failover means throw this away, go back here because there might be some content, whether it's email, database, that's in this that I don't want to lose. Remember, if I permanently failed over, I would lose that. So if I fail over and I need this more than this, I can say undo failover, and that could all just be testing data. It's not current production value data, throws it away. But again, that could be considered to some people data loss. You chose to lose that data when you say undo failover, okay? The other one is undo failback. And this one is a little more odd. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So undo failback means going back to failover from failback. Now, the reason why this can become a bit confusing, and I actually titled it Data Confusion, is because I have a snapshot now running here and a snapshot running here, and I say, you know what? I want to back out of this failback. Now I want to go back this way, and I want to undo that process. Well, now we create yet another snapshot down here, and now we're trying to really kind of understand where this data resides, whether it's here or here. And again, it's not super complicated, but it can create data confusion. So these are components that are going to be necessary for certain situations, but understand what they do, and that's going to be probably the best value, if you will, to truly understanding what's going to happen at each stage. So I tell people all the time, stay within the first lines that we talked about. These, again, can be considered safety nets, but at the same time, undo failover could be something that we just make sure that we wanted this content and don't care about this. Undo failback, somebody failed over, failed back, and before they committed, wanted to go back to failover and just wanted to stay within that cycle. Again, truly explaining how these pieces of data or position can be kind of complicated to some people, and that's not what we really want to portray when we're showing a product that works this well. So I hope this helped you better understand the process. I know when you look at it when it's done, it looks a bit convoluted and confusing, but if you watch from the beginning and you see this all lay out in front of you, it'll make a lot more sense, and all you have to do is follow these arrows. And again, starting from the root, which is in blue, all your decisions are based from the root or go back to the root. Thank you for your time.